History is often written by the victors, but what about the voices of those who suffered in silence? Women throughout the ages have faced unimaginable torment, their stories often buried beneath the weight of time. From the witch hunts of the Middle Ages to the brutal practices of modern-day oppression, the experiences of women reveal a disturbing pattern of cruelty and resilience. Imagine living in a world where your very existence is met with violence and disdain. In this clip, we'll delve into the shocking realities of the torture women have endured across different cultures and eras, and explore how these painful legacies continue to resonate in our fight for justice and equality today. Unfortunately, both sexism and superstition were alive and well in medieval times. The ramifications of this deadly combination resulted in women being accused of witchcraft or heresy and subsequently burned at the stake. Originally a Babylonian form of capital punishment, burning at the stake was later practiced in Europe during the Middle Ages. From Spanish heretics during the Inquisition to French martyrs like Joan of Arc, the practice of burning people to death became distressingly popular during this time. The punishment was simple. The accused would be bound to a stake and burned until their anguished screams finally ceased. But in some cases, those in charge would provide the victims with a semblance of mercy by attaching a container of gunpowder to the victim. This would explode when heated by the fire, killing the person much quicker. Other mechanisms included placing the victim in a chain noose and killing them by hanging before the fire could do much damage. Shockingly, many accusations of witchcraft during this time didn't actually originate from an authority like the church. In those days, it was common that accusations of heresy or witchcraft came about due to petty rivalries in small towns. Frighteningly, mere finger-pointing could lead to someone being killed by fire, if the accusations were supported by others. In England, burning people for heresy fell out of fashion in 1612, but burning at the stake for other crimes continued well into the 18th century. From the 16th until the 19th century, women accused of being scolds, shrews, or having loose morals were often fitted masks known as scolds bridles that held their tongues with an iron gag. A bridle may be mostly associated with horses, but from at least the 16th century and well into the 19th, the so-called scolds bridle was also used on people. This iron mask, fitted with a gag, was usually strapped onto women accused of gossiping, quarreling, or committing blasphemy. The device had two purposes. The first, obviously, was to silence the wearer. The second was to humiliate them. People clad in a scold's bridle were often paraded around town, where townspeople could jeer and throw things. These devices varied in design, but were often quite similar. They were iron masks which, according to the BBC, resembled a muzzle or cage for the head. A lock at the back held the bridle into place, and most had a metal gag to hold the tongue down. As the National Trust for Scotland notes, some of these gags were spiked so the wearer's tongue would be cut if they tried to speak. The last recorded use of a scold's bridle took place in 1856. The ducking stool was a form of public punishment used in Europe and colonial America, primarily during the 16th to 18th centuries. It was often employed against women accused of minor crimes such as scolding, gossiping, or witchcraft. The punishment was intended to humiliate the accused and, at times, test guilt, particularly in cases of alleged witchcraft. The ducking stool typically consisted of a sturdy wooden chair, sometimes mounted on a long beam or pole, which was then fastened to a fulcrum, such as the end of a seesaw-like structure. The accused would be strapped into the chair and then lowered into a body of water, usually a river or pond. The accused might be ducked, submerged, repeatedly into the water, with the level of punishment varying based on the perceived severity of the offense. For women accused of witchcraft, there was a belief that if they floated, they were guilty, based on the erroneous idea that witches were supernaturally light and would not sink. If they sank, they were considered innocent, but drowning was a risk, making it a dangerous ordeal. As legal reforms progressed and attitudes toward criminal justice shifted, the use of the ducking stool fell out of favor by the 18th century. Torture methods like this were seen as barbaric and were gradually abandoned in favor of more civilized forms of punishment. Also known as the wooden horse or the chevalet, variations of the Spanish donkey were used from the Middle Ages all the way up until the American Civil War in the 1860s. The Spanish donkey might sound like an overpriced cocktail, but the pain it delivered was far worse than a hangover. Otherwise known as the wooden horse or chevalet, it was a torture device utilized by Jesuits, Civil War soldiers, and even Paul Revere himself. Made out of wood and shaped like a triangular prism on stilts, with the triangle's point facing upward. While there were numerous iterations of the implement, all known versions essentially operated in the same manner. The victim was made to sit atop the triangle, causing severe discomfort to their genital area. Sometimes, their torturer would add weights to their ankles to slowly weigh them down. Other times, the torturer would tickle their feet or hold a flame to their feet to cause them to squirm, which also increased the agony. Perhaps most horrifying, spikes could be added to the triangle's point, increasing the likelihood of severe injuries to the genitalia. If someone were lucky, the Spanish donkey might simply cause intense discomfort. If they weren't, it could cause agonizing pain, disfigurement, and even death. And it was used long after the Middle Ages ended. The chair of torture, also known as the iron chair, the Judas chair, or the witch's chair, was a brutal device used extensively in medieval Europe and early modern periods. This chair was often used in interrogations to extract confessions, especially in cases involving accusations of witchcraft or heresy. The torture chair was a sturdy metal or wooden chair covered with hundreds of sharp spikes on the seat, back, armrests, and footrests. The spikes were positioned so that any movement by the victim would lead to deeper and more painful punctures into the flesh. Depending on the variation of the chair, the spikes could range in size, and some chairs were also equipped with straps or tight bindings to ensure that the victim was firmly held in place. The process of torture in the chair could vary but was always intensely painful. In many cases, the victim would be stripped partially or fully before being placed on the spikes. Once secured, they were left in place for extended periods. In some instances, the torturer would apply pressure by tightening the straps, forcing the spikes deeper into the flesh. This could lead to severe blood loss, infection, and prolonged suffering. For added torment, some chairs were equipped with heat, where fire or hot coals could be placed beneath the seat to add burning to the puncturing pain. This device allowed torturers to prolong a victim's suffering without immediately killing them. Victims could be left on the chair for hours or even days, enduring unimaginable pain and psychological terror. The goal was often to extract a confession or proof of guilt, which, in the case of women accused of witchcraft, usually meant admitting to consorting with the devil or engaging in sorcery.